Hi guys, and welcome to Calm Night Radio Channel. Tonight we step into a world where freedom is spoken aloud, yet never fully allowed to settle in the body. You stand in the warm dark of a southern evening, listening to insects hum above the grass, while somewhere beyond the trees a church bell rings with tired hope. What does liberty feel like when every road, every contract, every glance seems to ask who gave you permission to move? What secret skills do people build when the world insists on watching them breathe? So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you are here, comment below with your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, and you begin where the air still holds the smoke of war. The ground beneath your feet is soft with dust and trampled weeds. A fence leans crooked near a road cut through red clay, and the smell of damp earth rises after a late afternoon rain. Somewhere close by, a mule snorts. Somewhere farther off, a hammer strikes wood in slow, careful beats. Everything sounds unfinished. That is the first feeling, not peace, not triumph, unfinished. You are a black American in the first uncertain years after slavery. And freedom does not arrive like sunrise pouring cleanly over a field. It arrives like a door opened only part way, with someone standing in the gap. You can step forward, yes, but not without being measured, not without being counted, not without someone deciding whether your movement looks proper. The official story sounds grand. Enslavement has ended. The nation has bled and proclaimed a new order. Words like liberty and citizenship float through speeches and newspapers like bright paper lanterns. Very elegant, very noble. Yet on the ground, where your shoes collect mud and your stomach keeps its own private record of hunger, life is ruled by smaller things: a pass, a contract, a curfew, a stranger's mood, a sheriff's opinion, a landowner's memory. Freedom, it turns out, can be forced to wear a leash. You walk past cabins built from rough boards that still carry the scent of sap. Some roofs sag, some porches hold rocking chairs with split seats. In one yard, women boil laundry in black kettles, steam lifting into the cooling air. In another, children chase one another with a kind of laughter that sounds almost reckless. It catches you off guard because joy has survived. Somehow, absurdly, gloriously, joy has survived. That survival begins with the body. You learn quickly how to carry yourself in a world trying to rewrite your steps. You listen before you speak. You notice which roads feel safe at dusk. You memorize faces. You study tone. You understand that a glance held too long can become an accusation, yet lowering your eyes too quickly can invite another kind of insult. Daily life becomes a craft. Not because you are timid, but because precision keeps people alive. Some newly freed people search for family first. They travel by wagon, on foot, by rumour, by faith. They ask questions in churchyards and at railroad depots. They follow half-remembered names across counties and state lines. A mother seeks a daughter sold years ago. A husband asks after a wife taken to another plantation. A brother carries the shape of a childhood nickname like a treasure map in his head. The records are broken, the roads are long, and the answers often come wrapped in silence. Yet the search continues. In a country that treated kinship like property paperwork, finding your own people becomes an act of rebuilding the world. The sound of that rebuilding is everywhere. Sawing, sewing, praying, pages turning, pots clanging, babies fussing in the heat, men and women negotiating wages with owners who still expect obedience as if history were merely taking a nap. You can hear ambition in these sounds, though it is a tired ambition, not the polished kind from speeches, a practical kind. Bread ambition, shoe ambition, roof ambition. The ambition to sleep one night without wondering who can legally command your body at dawn. For a brief moment, possibility opens wider than many white Southerners can tolerate. Black men vote in some places. Black communities establish schools. Churches expand into centres of political life, education, and mutual aid. You may enter a meeting house by lamplight and feel the room thrum with purpose. The wooden benches creak under bodies still sore from labour. The room smells of sweat, starch, and candle wax. A preacher raises his voice. A teacher reads from a text. A veteran speaks about rights with the stern patience of someone who has already seen one world collapse. You are not only surviving here, you are imagining. That imagination frightens people who preferred the old order neat and profitable. So the machinery of control begins to rearrange itself. Not identical, never exactly the same. That would be too honest. Instead, it comes dressed in legal language. Local regulations, labour demands, and moral lectures. It tells you where you may gather, how you may work, when you must be indoors, which documents you should carry, and what sort of behaviour proves your worthiness. Funny how the people who stole years from your life suddenly become very interested in discipline. One common demand is labour contracts. On paper, these appear modern and sensible. Employment, terms, responsibility, quite tidy. In practice, many agreements are designed to trap freed people in dependence. Wages may be delayed, reduced, or manipulated. Leaving a bad arrangement can be treated as a crime or proof of dishonesty. Illiteracy, created by generations of enforced deprivation, becomes a weapon used against those forced to sign or mark papers they cannot fully inspect. Ink can do what chains once did, only with better manners. You feel the trap in the timing of everything. The planting season cannot wait. Landowners need fields worked. Cotton does not care about political theory. Tobacco has no interest in justice. So pressure grows immediately. If you do not sign, how will you eat? If you do sign, how much of yourself have you handed back? Hunger is persuasive. Debt is persuasive. A child with a fever is persuasive. Systems of control rarely rely on brute force alone. They prefer to recruit necessity. Then there is movement. The simple act of walking can become suspicious. Why are you on this road? Where are you headed? Who said you could be out this late? You may stand in a town where the evening light turns storefront windows amber, where the smell of molasses drifts from a shop door, and still feel the hard edge beneath every ordinary thing. A sidewalk is not just a sidewalk. A road is not just a road. Space itself has rules that shift according to who is looking at you. This is where social control becomes almost theatrical. You're expected to show respect in ways that soothe white anxiety. You're expected to speak carefully, defer gracefully, and move with visible awareness of racial boundaries that everyone pretends are natural. They're not natural. They're rehearsed, repeated, enforced, taught to children until cruelty begins to feel like etiquette. Yet inside black households, another education unfolds. A grandmother at a table lit by lamplight teaches which words to use in dangerous company. An uncle explains how to read a contract by listening for what the other man avoids saying. A mother shows a child how to step off the road at the right moment, not because she believes in inferiority, but because she believes in tomorrow. This knowledge is intimate. It passes through kitchens fragrant with cornmeal and greens, through brush arbours buzzing with summer insects, through wash days and sewing circles and evening prayers. Survival becomes a curriculum. You also learn to measure allies carefully. Federal officials may promise protection, but protection can be thin, late, or absent. Some missionaries open schools and offer material help. Some soldiers stand between black communities and open terror. Others look away. Historians still debate how much lasting transformation was ever truly possible under the political conditions of the time, especially once northern commitment began to weaken. On the ground, theory matters less than whether someone arrives before nightfall when riders are rumoured nearby, and rumours travel like weather, quietly, quickly. A man was beaten for refusing unfair terms. A woman was turned away from land she believed she had secured. A preacher was threatened after speaking too boldly. A teacher received warnings. A family vanished from one county and appeared in another with their belongings piled in a borrowed wagon. Fear becomes part of the atmosphere, like humidity, invisible, but on your skin. Still, fear is not the whole story, not even close. There are astonishing moments of insistence. A woman buys cloth and sews dresses in colours she chooses for herself. A man adopts a surname and keeps it, no matter who mocks him. Children walk to school carrying slates, trying letters their grandparents were forbidden to learn. Couples legalized marriages formed years earlier under slavery, speaking vows aloud before witnesses because the world will now have to acknowledge what they always knew. These are quiet acts. They are also revolutionary. One quirky detail from this era still startles people. In some places, newly freed families spent precious money on photographs almost as soon as they could afford them. It might seem like a luxury when food, shelter, and safety were uncertain. But a photograph could do something powerful. It could fix a family in dignity. It could declare, with shoes polished and back straight, that these lives belong to themselves. Imagine the feeling of sitting still in stiff clothes under a photographer's cloth, smelling dust and chemicals, knowing that for once the image would not be a plantation inventory or a crude caricature. It would be you, properly seen. That hunger to be seen on one's own terms runs through everything. It shapes clothing, speech, worship, naming, labour and family life. Control systems try to reduce people to categories, to labour units, to bodies that can be directed and doubted. Survival pushes back by insisting on texture. You are a parent, a carpenter, a singer, a widow, a reader, a deacon, a child who likes peaches, a teenager with sore feet, a man proud of his hat, a woman who saves scraps of ribbon in a box beneath the bed. The more complete your humanity becomes in your own eyes and among your people, the harder it is for the system to own the whole story. Of course, power does not yield because someone feels deeply human. It reacts, it narrows, it improvises. In many communities, white resistance hardens as black independence becomes visible. That resistance may appear as legal restriction, economic punishment, public insult, or organized violence. It may arrive in daylight through officials, or after dark through men who prefer masks to accountability. The methods vary. The message does not. Stay in the place assigned to you. But there is a problem with that command. People who have already endured slavery know something about endurance that their oppressors often fail to understand. Endurance is not passivity. It is a moving intelligence. It watches, adapts, stores detail, and waits for openings. It survives one day without surrendering the next. You sense this in the way communities gather information, pool money, spread warnings, teach children, negotiate work, and protect elders. Resistance does not always shout. Sometimes it cooks dinner, hides papers, shares news, and leaves before dawn. Night settles. Frogs call from wet ground. A kerosene lamp flickers in a window, painting gold against rough planks. The smell of smoke drifts from a chimney. You feel the fatigue in your shoulders, the grit on your cuffs, the soreness in your feet. But you also feel something steadier beneath the exhaustion. A refusal, not dramatic, not theatrical, just solid. You lie down in a room still warm from the day, listening to the small sounds of others breathing nearby. Maybe a child turns in sleep. Maybe someone whispers a final prayer. Outside, the world remains uncertain, crowded with rules and men who think they can regulate every motion. Yet even here, especially here, life goes on making itself. Families gather, names are chosen, songs are sung low, plans are made for mourning. Freedom has not arrived whole. That much is plain. It has arrived contested, bargained over, stalked and fenced. But it has arrived enough to awaken something that cannot easily be pushed back into silence. You feel it in the pulse of daily choices, in the stubborn order of a home, in the clean fold of a Sunday shirt, in the scratch of chalk across a slate, in the nerve it takes to walk down a road under watchful eyes and continue walking anyway. That is how survival begins here. Not as one grand gesture, but as thousands of measured acts, a step taken, a bargain tested, a family named, a right spoken aloud. A body carried carefully through danger toward another day. Evening settles over a southern town with the slow confidence of something familiar. The last light clings to shop windows, and the unpaved street keeps the day's heat a little longer. You hear wagon wheels grind over dirt, a dog bark behind a fence, and a screen door slap shut with unnecessary force. The air smells of tobacco smoke, horse sweat, lamp oil, and stale flour from a nearby general store. Everything looks ordinary at first glance. That is part of the trick. You walk through this town knowing that ordinary life can turn on you without warning. A trip to buy salt, a visit to a cousin, a search for work, a stop at the well. Each small action passes through a net of rules that seem almost petty until you feel how tightly they close. A town can be made into a machine with simple parts. A clerk who refuses service, a policeman who asks questions too slowly, a magistrate who smiles while issuing fines, a neighbour who reports your presence after dark. None of it needs spectacle. It only needs repetition. After emancipation, many southern states and local governments began writing laws meant to control black life under a new name. These were often called black codes, though the details changed from place to place. The idea was plain enough. If slavery could not continue in law, then dependency, restriction, and punishment would have to do the work instead. It was an administrative imagination, very inventive in the worst possible way. On paper, these laws often sounded dry. Vagrancy, apprenticeship, labour regulation, public order, respectability, such pleasant words. You could almost mistake them for civic housekeeping. Yet beneath that surface, the target was clear. Black people who lacked written proof of employment could be arrested as vagrants. Children could be forced into labour arrangements under the claim that someone else knew what was best for them. Gatherings could be watched or broken up. Weapons could be restricted. Testimony could be limited. Fines could be imposed that poor people had almost no chance of paying. Law became a costume worn by control. You feel that control most sharply in how it enters the daily timetable. The sun goes down, and your world narrows. Curfews in some places make evening itself suspicious. If you're outside at the wrong hour, your presence can be interpreted as disorder. Noisy white men leaving a saloon may be called boys being boys. You walking home after work may be called a problem. Remarkable how elastic the word order becomes when power wants company. The fear is not only arrest, it is the chain that follows arrest. A fine you cannot pay, labour assigned to satisfy that debt, a record that marks you as troublesome, lost wages, lost time, a family left waiting. The law presses on the body indirectly, but the body still bears the cost. Your wrists may remain free, yet your choices are arranged like furniture in a room too small to move comfortably. You stop near a courthouse square where the building rises pale in the fading light. Its columns look confident, almost sleepy, as if justice lives here and naps after supper. Men stand outside talking in low voices. Boots scrape the steps. Someone laughs. A horse flicks its tail against flies. The courthouse smells of paper, dust, and summer heat trapped in brick. Inside, ledgers and statutes give the appearance of fairness. Outside, everyone knows which faces matter more when testimony is weighed. This is one of the strangest things about life under these rules. The system insists on pretending it is neutral. If you are punished, it says you broke a law. If you lose custody of a child, it says proper procedure was followed. If your labour is claimed through fines or contracts, it says obligations must be honoured. The language of administration makes cruelty sound like bookkeeping. It is not dramatic enough for some people to notice. That is exactly why it works. Take vagrancy laws. They could be broad enough to catch nearly anyone unwanted by local authorities. Unemployed or between jobs, travelling without documentation, standing in the wrong place, looking idle to someone determined to see idleness. Once accused, proving innocence was difficult when the system itself benefited from your guilt. Historians still disagree on how uniformly these laws were enforced across the South, because local practice varied so widely, but their chilling effect was undeniable. You did not need every sheriff to arrest every black person. You only needed enough examples to teach the lesson, and lessons were taught constantly. A father leaving one county to look for better wages in another might be stopped and questioned. A young man walking with confidence might be called insolent. A woman refusing disrespect from an employer might find herself described as disorderly. Law and custom work together like two hands washing each other. One could threaten formal punishment, the other could threaten informal retaliation. Together, They made caution feel sensible and resistance feel expensive. Children were drawn into this system through apprenticeship laws and local arrangements that often placed black minors under white control. Officials sometimes claimed that black parents were unfit or unable to provide. That judgment was especially bitter given who had spent generations breaking black families by force. Now the same society could turn around, stroke its chin thoughtfully, and declare concern for children. It takes a very particular kind of nerve, a cruel one. You can imagine a mother hearing that her son is to be apprenticed to a former owner or another white employer. The room smells of soap and boiled vegetables. Light comes through the doorway in a hot stripe. She stands rigid, hands still wet from washing, while an official explains the arrangement in polished terms. Guidance, training, stability, fine words again. But beneath them lies the same old claim that black life is never fully entitled to direct itself. Control also extends to the ability to testify, own weapons, or access public remedies. In some areas, black people face sharp restrictions in court or before officials, making it harder to challenge abuse. If a white employer cheated wages, who would believe you if someone threatened your family? What lawful means of protection were allowed? The imbalance created a climate where legality and vulnerability could coexist comfortably. You could be told to trust the law by people who had already arranged for the law not to trust you. This atmosphere changes how you move through public space. You keep your papers safer than some people keep jewellery. You learn which alleys avoid trouble. You know that a conversation outside a store can be overheard and twisted. At the barbershop, the church steps, the market stall, information passes in coded rhythms. Who was stopped? Which magistrate is harsher? Which farm underpays? Which road is best avoided near dusk? Survival requires a quiet geography of knowledge. A quirky detail from this era reveals how tense the world could be. In some communities, people judged danger by the patterns of bells, hoofbeats, or even unusual stillness in the street. Silence itself could become information. If the usual evening chatter suddenly faded, if a porch emptied too quickly, if a dog barked and no one hushed it, attentive people understood that something was wrong. Imagine developing an ear so fine that the absence of sound begins to speak. That is not paranoia, that is training under pressure. The law also shaped labour through mandates that pushed black people toward agricultural work under white supervision. Independence looked threatening to local authorities. If too many freed people controlled their own movement, negotiated their own terms, or refused degrading treatment, then the social order felt unstable to those who profited from it. So legal tools were crafted to make dependence seem normal and self-direction seem suspicious. In that world, a contract is rarely just a contract. It can be a leash with a signature line. You pass a field at dawn where mist lies low over cotton rows. The smell is green and wet, mixed with manure and turned soil. Men and women move into the day with sacks, hoes, and stiff backs. The work itself is familiar, but the meaning has changed and not changed at once. Payment exists. Perhaps choice exists. Sometimes, yet the structure around labour still pulls toward coercion. Wages can be withheld, debts can be invented, rules can be rewritten. The sunrise is beautiful in a way that almost feels rude. There were federal efforts to challenge some of these abuses. Agencies like the Freedmen's Bureau attempted to support labour contracts, education, and legal protections for freed people. In some places, those efforts mattered profoundly. In others, they were underfunded, resisted, or undermined by hostile local power. Scholars continue to debate how much stronger enforcement might have altered daily life had political will remained firm. What is beyond dispute is that many black Americans quickly understood they could not assume distant authority would rescue them in time, so communities built defensive habits. Church leaders kept watch on local developments, teachers shared news as carefully as lessons, families pooled money for legal help or travel, men walked together when possible, women exchanged information while washing clothes, shelling peas, or tending children. The domestic world became a communications network. A front porch could be a warning post. A prayer meeting could carry strategy under the cover of devotion. A meal shared after sundown could include more intelligence than a formal office. These adaptations did not remove danger, they made life possible inside it. At times, the absurdity of the rules must have felt almost insulting beyond measure. You are told you are free, but must prove useful to avoid arrest. You are told family is sacred, but your parental rights are treated as conditional. You are told law protects the peace, but the peace seems to require your submission more than anyone else's restraint. No wonder some people spoke with a dry humour sharpened by experience. When the world is ridiculous in a lethal way, sarcasm becomes a survival tool. Still, the emotional toll is heavy. Constant regulation wears on the nerves. You feel it in the shoulders, always a little tight, in the jaw, set too often, in the habit of scanning a street before stepping into it. In the relief of closing a door behind you at night and hearing the latch fall into place. Home may be modest, with rough blankets, cracked bowls, and walls that let in cold air during winter, yet privacy itself becomes a luxury. Inside, you can finally exhale without translating yourself for every passerby. A child asks simple questions. Why must I come home before dark? Why can that boy speak like that and not get in trouble? Why do you hide the papers in the chest? Adults answer carefully, because childhood deserves softness, even when the world does not provide it. They teach caution without teaching surrender. They try, at least. That balance may be one of the hardest arts ever practiced, and still life continues in stubborn detail. Bread rises near the hearth, dresses are mended. Men shave on Saturday evening with water gone cool in a basin. Women braid hair by lamplight while talking in low voices. Someone hums a hymn. Someone tells a joke too good to waste. Someone writes a letter for a neighbour who cannot yet write one alone. Under legal pressure, humanity becomes more deliberate. Every ordinary tenderness matters more because it is not guaranteed room to breathe. By the time full darkness covers the road, the town has settled into separate pockets of light. A saloon glows noisily. A church window holds a softer gold. Farther out, cabins show brief flickers through chinks in the boards. You listen to crickets stitching the night together. You smell pine smoke drifting across a yard. The law may have spent all day trying to define your place, but the night reminds you that no code can fully map a people's inner life. That inner life is where survival deepens, not in compliance alone, and not in open defiance alone, but in the patient skill of reading systems without letting them read your whole soul. The rules can narrow the road. They can make simple acts dangerous. They can dress fear in official language and call it order, but they cannot stop the quiet human work of judging, adapting, teaching, protecting, and hoping with great precision. So you move carefully through this legal maze, alert to the petty traps and polished lies. You keep your papers dry. You keep your ears open. You learn the town's moods the way sailors learn currents. Beneath the weight of paper laws and daily fear, survival becomes not just endurance, but expertise. Morning comes early in a place where labour decides the rhythm of nearly everything. The sky is still pale when you hear the first bucket dip into a well, the first rooster protest the dark, the first cart rattle toward a road lined with dust and scrub. Damp air clings to your skin, the scent of wet wood, turned soil. An old smoke hangs low around the cabins. Your hands already know the day before your mind fully wakes. That is how deeply work has entered the body. You live in a world where freedom is supposed to mean the right to sell your labour, refuse bad terms, and keep the fruit of your effort. In practice, labour becomes one of the main tools used to keep black Americans under pressure after slavery. Work is everywhere, of course. Fields need tending, railroads need laying, streets need sweeping, kitchens need cooking, houses need cleaning, timber needs cutting, bricks need firing, cotton needs picking. The problem is not labour itself. The problem is who controls its terms, who keeps the records, who decides what counts as fair, and who stands ready to punish those who demand more. In theory, wages sound simple. You work, you're paid. Very modern, very civilized. Yet in much of the South, work arrangements after emancipation were built to preserve old habits of domination. Employers delayed payment, changed terms, or counted debts so creatively that a person could work a season and finish with almost nothing. Numbers on a page can be more slippery than eels in a rain barrel when the person holding the ledger already thinks your labour belongs to him by nature, You stand in a field under a sun that rises hard and white, burning the mist away from the rows. Cotton plants scrape your fingers. Burrs catch on cloth. Sweat collects beneath your collar and runs down your back in a slow, relentless line. Nearby, sacks drag over dirt with a soft, rough sound. The smell of crushed leaves mixes with dust and body heat. This is not the plantation world exactly, but the memory of it lies close enough to touch. That memory sits in the posture of employers, in the expectations of overseers, in the impatience shown toward any hint of bargaining. One common arrangement becomes sharecropping. A landowner provides land, perhaps seed, perhaps tools, sometimes a mule, and the labouring family works the crop in exchange for a share of the harvest. On paper, this can look like partnership, a small miracle of cooperation, if you believe the brochures no one printed. In reality, the imbalance of power usually runs deep. The landowner often controls the accounting, the local merchant extends credit at punishing rates, and the crop itself may rise or fail based on weather, pests, or market prices far beyond your influence. By the time the harvest is weighed and the debts are calculated, you may learn that a year of hard work has produced not independence but another year of obligation. You can almost feel that trap in the objects around you. The hoe with its worn handle, the mule harness smelling of leather and animal sweat, the seed sack patched twice over, the little notebook held by a man who calls you friend until settlement day. Material things carry power when someone else decides how they are priced. A broken plough becomes your debt. A bag of flour bought on credit becomes your debt. A doctor called for a sick child becomes your debt. Life itself seems payable in installments you never finish. And then there is convict leasing, one of the bleakest transformations of the era. States and local governments arrested large numbers of black people, often under broad or discriminatory laws, and then leased prisoners to private companies, farms, and industries. These leased labourers worked in mines, on railroads, in lumber camps, and on plantations. Conditions could be catastrophic. Unlike slaveholders before the war, lessees had little long-term investment in a worker's survival. A brutal economy took shape, one that treated black bodies as disposable fuel for profit, while pretending this was merely criminal justice at work. It is amazing what a society can hide beneath the phrase lawful custody. Imagine a line of men moving toward a mine entrance before sunrise. Chains clink softly with each step. The air smells of iron, mud, and lamp smoke. Their clothes are coarse against the skin. The guards carry themselves with the easy boredom of men who consider cruelty part of the job description. A cough echoes. Someone slips on wet ground. The day has not properly begun, and already the earth feels ready to swallow them. This is labour stripped of even the pretense of mutual agreement. Historians still argue over the exact scale and local variation of post-war labour coercion, especially when comparing regions and industries. But there is broad agreement on the larger truth. Systems of work after emancipation often recreated severe racial subordination by other means. The names changed, the paperwork changed. The result, for many, was a life shaped by relentless toil under rules they did not control. Women faced their own forms of exploitation. Black women laboured in fields, kitchens, laundries, nurseries, boarding houses, and private homes, often under conditions that combined low pay, racial humiliation, and constant vulnerability. Domestic service could require impossible emotional discipline. You must cook meals you may not be invited to eat properly. You must wash linens softer than your own blankets. You must raise another family's children while your own wait at home. You must keep a voice even, a face calm, a back straight, and a spirit somehow intact. The smell of lye soap, starch, grease, and hot irons becomes part of the atmosphere of survival. In a laundry yard, steam lifts from kettles and damp sheets snap on lines in the wind. Hands chap from scrubbing, arms ache from lifting. The work looks ordinary enough, almost peaceful from a distance, yet every motion is part of an economy that undervalues black labour while depending on it completely. That contradiction sits at the centre of so much American history. Needed, but disrespected. Essential, but underpaid. Everywhere present, yet denied real authority. Wage theft is another quiet thief in this world. An employer promises a monthly amount, then claims poor business. A foreman marks fewer hours than were worked. A merchant adjusts account totals to his own advantage. You can protest, but protest itself carries risk. The local sheriff may know the employer. The magistrate may trust the employer's word as naturally as he trusts gravity. Even when you are technically free to leave, the cost of leaving can be severe. Travel requires money. New work is uncertain. Family cannot eat principle by itself, however nourishing it might be to the soul. Some labour arrangements also sought to enforce dependence through annual contracts timed to the agricultural cycle. If you left before the year's end, wages could be forfeited or legal trouble threatened. If you complained too loudly, you might be blacklisted in the area. Reputation became a weapon. A white employer could call you lazy, insolent, unreliable, or difficult, and suddenly doors closed in places you had not even visited. The economy ran on labour, but also on rumour. You hear those rumours at crossroads stores where barrels of molasses stand beside bolts of fabric and tinware stacked in dim corners. The room smells of coffee, salt meat, dust, and old wood. Men linger near the counter discussing crops, weather, and who is hiring. Women speak in practical tones while pricing flour and thread. News travels through these spaces with the speed of hunger. This farm pays late. That camp works men to exhaustion. A railroad gang farther west offers cash, but the conditions are dangerous. A family downriver got trapped in debt after a flood ruined the cotton. Information matters because one bad decision can shape an entire year. There is also a harsh irony in the way skill is treated. Black workers brought immense agricultural knowledge, carpentry, blacksmithing, cooking expertise, textile skill, river knowledge, and many other forms of labour mastery shaped over generations. Yet recognition rarely matched ability. A man can build a solid house, mend a wagon axle, shoe a horse, and judge weather by smell, and still be addressed as if competence were a surprise. A woman can organise an entire household, preserve food, sew garments, tend the sick, and manage children with calm precision, and still be paid as though she were an afterthought. The insult is structural. One quirky tidbit reveals how workers sometimes navigated this world with sly intelligence. In some rural communities, people developed a sharp eye for the bookkeeping habits of specific merchants and landlords, memorizing who rounded numbers upward, who used unfamiliar terms to hide charges, and who changed handwriting styles in account books. Illiteracy did not mean ignorance. People compared notes, memorized patterns, and detected deception through observation that could be astonishingly precise. A person might not read every line, yet still know that something in the ledger smelled wrong, and often it did. Industrial labour opened different doors and different dangers. Railroads, turpentine camps, sawmills, docks, and mines drew black workers into expanding sectors of the post-war economy. These jobs could offer cash wages, mobility, and a degree of distance from plantation agriculture. They could also be deadly, unstable, and heavily controlled. In lumber camps, the scent of pine sap mixed with sweat and machinery. In turpentine work, the air could burn sharp in the nose. On railroad crews, iron, smoke, and dust coated everything. The body remained the main tool, and tools are often used until they break. What makes this history especially painful is that work itself had always held a double meaning in black life. Labour could be a source of pride, skill, provision, and community standing. It could also be the site of theft, coercion, and exhaustion imposed by racial domination. The challenge after emancipation was not simply to work, but to claim labour as truly your own in a society organised to prevent exactly that. How do you make a life from work when the surrounding system is constantly reaching into your pocket, your contract, and your future? The answer, in many places, was collective strategy. Families diversified labour when possible. Men farmed while women took in washing or domestic work. Children contributed in ways both ordinary and heartbreaking. Kin networks shared tools, seed, food, and advice. Churches sometimes organised aid. Mutual support societies emerged in towns and cities. The point was not comfort. Usually there was very little of that. The point was margin. A tiny margin could mean one extra meal, one avoided debt, 1 week of breathing room, one chance to refuse the very worst arrangement. There were also acts of labour resistance. Some subtle, some direct. Workers left exploitative employers despite risk. They negotiated for better shares. They slowed the pace under impossible demands. They challenged false accounts. They moved to towns when country life grew unbearable. They followed railroad lines or river routes toward places where opportunity seemed slightly less cruel. Such decisions did not always bring success. Sometimes they brought fresh hardship, but they revealed something important. Black workers were never merely passive victims of economic systems. They judged, calculated, improvised, and pushed back where they could. By late afternoon, the heat settles into your bones. A field seems endless. A washboard seems endless. A track line seems endless. Yet evening brings its own kind of a reckoning. You return with sore wrists, burning shoulders, dirty cuffs, and a mind still turning over the day's arithmetic. What was promised? What was spent? What was withheld? What might still be salvaged? The smell of supper, even if plain, feels like mercy. Cornbread, beans, greens cooked down until the pot gives up the last of its flavour. Simple food, hard-earned, and never simple at all. Inside a cabin or small house. The talk at night is rarely abstract. It is about whether to stay or move, trust or withdraw, buy on credit or do without, sign or refuse, complain or keep silent one more week. Children drift towards sleep while adults keep talking. A baby fusses, a chair scrapes. Outside. Cicadas pulse in the trees. Inside. Strategy is being made by people the world insists on calling powerless. That is the deeper truth beneath these labour systems. Work was used to confine Black Americans, to drain them, to keep freedom partial and costly. But labour was also where many people sharpened practical wisdom, built family endurance, and defended dignity in the most concrete way possible. A hand on a hoe, a broom, a hammer, a rail spike, a wash tub, a cooking spoon, a logging chain. Each hand carried not just effort, but judgment. So you keep working. Not because the system deserves your strength, but because life requires it. You measure the men with ledgers. You study the seasons. You note which roads lead to wages and which to traps. You learn to count what can be counted and remember what others wish to hide. Under an economy built to bend every movement towards someone else's gain, survival becomes a labour of its own. You wake in a world where space has been arranged to remind you of your place before anyone says a word. The arrangement is rarely accidental. A bench placed here, a doorway marked there, a schoolhouse built with care for one group and patched together for another. A waiting room divided by race. A neighbourhood line that seems invisible until you feel the punishment for crossing it. Geography, in this world, is not merely land, it is instruction. The morning street gives off the smell of damp boards and coal smoke. Sunlight slides over storefronts and catches on glass jars of candy, stacks of feed sacks, and bolts of fabric behind windows. A train whistle sounds in the distance, long and mournful, cutting through the town's lazy start. You hear wagon wheels over dirt, the sweep of a broom across a porch, the muted chatter outside a bakery. All of it looks like a typical American town trying on the costume of order, yet the costume has seams, and those seams are stitched with race. Segregation does not only tell you where you may sit, it teaches you how power has mapped the world. One street feels safer than another. One side of town gets better drainage, wider sidewalks, stronger lighting, and quicker repairs. Another side gets mud after rain. Standing water, overused wells, and a school that seems to lean a little farther each year. Infrastructure can speak. It often says, without embarrassment, who is expected to thrive and who is expected to cope. You walk toward the train depot with a smell of oil, metal, and cinders hanging in the air. Porters move luggage. Conductors call out destinations. Passengers gather with satchels, hat boxes, and small children rubbing sleep from their eyes. The platform is busy, almost cheerful if you do not look too closely. But then the lines appear. Separate waiting spaces, separate seating, separate expectations. The same train can carry different meanings depending on the car into which you are directed. Travel is not simply movement. It is a lesson in hierarchy on rails. In public transportation, segregation is both physical and psychological. You're not only placed apart, you are reminded, repeatedly, that the separation is meant to be seen. The hard wooden bench, the less desirable section, the constant risk of being challenged if the boundary shifts even slightly. A child learns quickly from this arrangement. So does an elder. Every journey becomes an argument the system tries to win with routine. This logic extends far beyond trains, streetcars, ferry boats, theatres, parks, cemeteries, libraries, hospitals, and schools all become part of a racial landscape. Even water fountains, which seem too trivial to carry the weight of a social order, are recruited into the performance, one spout for dignity, another for humiliation. Remarkable how a society can pour ideology into plumbing. Schools offer one of the clearest examples of geography turned into destiny. In many places, black children attend buildings with fewer books, rougher desks, shorter terms, and older materials discarded from white schools. The schoolyard may be bare earth. The stove may smoke badly in winter. Rain may find its way through the roof with stubborn confidence. Yet inside those rooms, learning still takes root. The smell of chalk, damp coats, pine floors, and ink becomes part of a sacred atmosphere. Education grows in scarcity, which is not ideal but is historically very American. You can picture a schoolhouse standing near a cluster of trees, small and plain, the paint already fading. Children arrive with slates, readers, and lunch pails if there is enough to carry. Their shoes collect red dust. Their voices rise and fall in recitation. The teacher, perhaps scarcely older than the eldest students, works with patience sharpened by purpose. Outside, the world has assigned this school lesser value. Inside, every lesson quietly disputes that judgment. Housing tells another story. Black families often find themselves restricted to certain neighbourhoods or stretches of road, whether by law, custom, intimidation, or simple exclusion by owners and agents. The result is not just social separation, but unequal access to resources, stability, and safety. Homes may be built on lower ground, more likely to flood, farther from clean water, farther from steady work, closer to industrial nuisance or neglect. A map becomes a social verdict, yet a neighbourhood is never only what power intended it to be. Walk through a black district at dusk and you may hear piano music drifting from an open window, smell onions frying in cast iron, catch the sweetness of magnolia or the tang of soap from wash day. Children skip rope in the lane, men talk on stoops, women exchange recipes, warnings, and gossip with the precision of diplomats. A seamstress works by lamplight, a barber closes up shop. A deacon returns from church carrying the day's last seriousness in his shoulders. Constraint shapes the neighbourhood, but so do style, humour, labour, and care. That dual reality matters. Segregated spaces were imposed as a means of control, yet black communities also built rich local worlds within and against those limits. Main streets of black business districts emerged in some towns and cities, with barbershops, cafes, beauty parlours, insurance offices, funeral homes, groceries, and newspapers. These places did not erase inequality. They offered pockets of autonomy. A person could enter such a shop and feel, for a brief hour, the pleasure of being addressed without condescension. It is hard to overstate how restorative simple respect can be when the wider world has made rudeness into policy. Public parks and leisure spaces reveal another layer of this geography. Pleasure itself is regulated. Who may stroll where, picnic where, swim where, play where, gather where. A lake on a hot day might glimmer beautifully under the sun, dragonflies skimming the water, cicadas pulsing in the heat, but access to that coolness can be rationed by race. Leisure is never just leisure in a system obsessed with ranking human beings. Even rest gets assigned a colour line. Historians still debate how much local variation shaped the lived experience of segregation before the full hardening of Jim Crow statutes, since custom and law interacted differently across regions and decades. What remains clear is that spatial control was central. You could not fully dominate a population without organising the places through which that population moved. Geography became a silent overseer, not with a whip in hand, perhaps, but with signs, barriers, ordinances, property rules, transit policies, and public expectations. One especially telling detail from this era involves architecture itself. In some segregated public buildings, separate entrances for black patrons were placed at the side or rear, not merely for convenience but for symbolism. Entry became theatre. Your approach to a door announced your rank before you crossed the threshold. Imagine the feel of rough brick under your fingertips as you steady yourself near a back entrance. The smell of kitchen heat or alley refuse nearby. While the front doors glow polished and welcoming for others, design can humiliate without speaking. Churches complicate the map in another way. They are places of refuge, but they also reflect the social order pressing outside their walls. In black churches, pews hold not only worship but planning, mourning, fundraising, teaching, and political discussion. The air is thick with perfume, sweat, pressed cotton, and old hymnals. Fans stir slowly in summer. Shoes tap wood floors. Voices rise in harmony so full it seems to lift the roof. Here, geography bends for a moment. The church becomes not just a building, but a territory of emotional sovereignty. Markets and stores can feel quite different. You might enter a shop where barrels of flour line one wall and tools hang from nails behind the counter. The owner watches your movements with a care he calls prudence. Other customers pretend not to stare. Every purchase becomes a tiny negotiation. How long do you linger? Which goods can you handle? What tone are you expected to use? Public commerce has its own script, and deviating from it can draw consequences disproportionate to the act. Buying sugar should not require choreography, yet here you are. Then there are the roads between places, rural lanes bordered by pine and scrub, city streets crowded with carts and pedestrians, footpaths worn by generations of use. These routes hold a knowledge that never appears on official maps. Which route avoids harassment? Which bridge is unsafe after dark? Which crossing is watched by men looking for excuses? Black Americans built mental atlases that combined terrain with social weather. A road could be dry, smooth, and still dangerous. Another could be muddy and long, yet safer because the people along it might offer warning or welcome. Children absorb this geography almost before they understand it. They learn where not to play, which door to use, which sidewalk to leave when others approach, which store owners might be fairer than most, which houses contain danger behind pretty curtains. Childhood under segregation involves unusual spatial intelligence. A little girl carrying books notices who gets the shade side of the street. A boy sent on an errand learns that some blocks grow colder even in summer, simply because eyes follow him there. Health and illness are shaped by these divisions too. Hospitals may segregate wards or deny proper treatment. Black neighbourhoods may have fewer sanitation services, poorer drainage, and less investment in public cleanliness. Disease loves inequality, so do mosquitoes. The smell of stagnant water after rain, the buzz at dusk, the endless effort to keep a home clean despite structural neglect, all become part of the geography of survival. Public policy enters the body through the environment, and yet, people respond with creativity. Porch culture turns narrow spaces into social worlds. Gardens bloom in small yards. Side streets become stages for games, music, and fashion. Businesses cluster where opportunity is possible. Schools, lodges, and churches operate as anchors of place. Women organise cleanliness drives, social clubs, and aid efforts. Men debate politics outside storefronts and in lodge halls. Young people dress sharply for Saturday evening and make a parade of dignity down streets built to contain them. Space can be used even when it cannot be fully owned. A quirky tidbit from many black neighbourhoods is the central role of front porches as information exchanges, more than simple resting spots. Porches functioned as lookout points, visiting rooms, cooling stations, and neighbourhood observatories. From a porch you could hear who passed, see which wagon stopped where. Notice a stranger's gait and judge the evening's mood. The rough wood beneath your bare feet, the fan moving warm air, the scent of supper drifting from nearby houses, all became part of a living social map. It was intelligence gathering disguised as ordinary life, which is often the safest kind. Night arrives differently in segregated space. Street lamps may thin out. Noise from one quarter of town may sound festive, from another threatening. The same moon shines on all roofs, but not all roofs offer equal protection. You hear a train groan in the distance, a baby crying through an open window, a man singing softly on his walk home. Somewhere, laughter spills from a porch. Somewhere else, a door shuts quickly. The map changes with darkness. You move through this world by learning that every place carries instructions and every instruction carries a judgment. But you also learn that places can be remade from within. A schoolhouse can become a sanctuary of ambition. A storefront can become a centre of community. A porch can become a listening post. A church can become a republic of hope for an evening. Segregation tries to turn land into obedience. Black life answers by filling restricted spaces with purpose, memory, enterprise, and style. So the geography of control is never merely about where you stand. It is about what the standing means. It is about roads lined with risk, rooms arranged for humiliation, neighbourhoods neglected on purpose, and public spaces divided to make inequality feel natural. But it is also about the deep human refusal to let a map define the full measure of a people. Even within fenced meanings, life keeps arranging itself into something richer than the planners intended. The day can feel calm right up until the moment it does not. That is one of the cruelest features of life under constant surveillance. You might be standing outside a boarding house brushing dust from your sleeve, or carrying a package of flour home through the late afternoon heat. When the atmosphere changes without warning, a conversation stops, a horse slows, a face appears in a doorway. The street remains the same street, yet suddenly it feels narrower. Someone is watching, and in that world, being watched is never a neutral thing. The air smells of sun-baked dirt, leather tack, and the faint sourness of standing water near the edge of the road. Flies gather where the shade is thin. You hear a blacksmith's hammer from across town, the ring sharp and regular, then the softer murmur of voices that turn quieter as you pass. Surveillance lives in those little shifts, in the pause before a greeting, in the sideways glance, in the man who seems to have no business near the courthouse but remains there all the same, in the woman who knows exactly who entered whose yard after dusk. Power does not rely only on written law, it relies on eyes. Police officers, employers, landlords, merchants, white neighbours, and vigilantes all help enforce the racial order by observing black movement and interpreting it according to their own interests. The result is a society where ordinary behaviour can be recast as suspicious behaviour at any moment. Walking too quickly looks insolent. Walking too slowly looks idle. Speaking firmly looks aggressive. Speaking too softly looks evasive. You are judged inside a frame built to deny you the comfort of simple innocence. Police play a central role in this system. In many places, law enforcement acts less like an impartial public service and more like a local manager of racial hierarchy. A constable may know every landowner worth knowing, understand which black families are considered respectable by white standards, and keep track of who works where, who moved recently, who complained, and who might be made an example of. Arrest is not always the main point. Often the point is pressure, a stop on the street, a question asked in a way that reminds you of the consequences of answering badly, a hand resting too comfortably on a baton, a warning delivered with false politeness. You can feel that pressure outside a general store where men gather in the shade near barrels and feed sacks. A deputy strolls past with the lazy confidence of someone whose authority is rarely questioned. Spurs jingle. Dust clings to his boots. He nods to certain white townsmen, and the nod itself is part of the machinery. It says, "I know who belongs with me." If his gaze lingers on you, it carries another message. Explain yourself. That demand for explanation follows black Americans into countless corners of daily life. Employers want to know where you were after work. Landlords want to know who visits your home. Merchants want to know whether you can really pay. White neighbours want to know what business brought you to their part of town. Surveillance is intimate in a way that makes dignity difficult. It enters the home through rent collection, the workplace through supervision, the street through police attention, the church through informants, and even leisure through the constant risk of being accused of impropriety. Privacy becomes a rare and valuable thing. Landlords hold a particular kind of power because shelter is not optional. A crooked floor, a leaking roof, a room crowded with too many bodies can still be treated as a privilege if eviction hovers nearby. The smell of damp plaster, old cooking grease, and wood smoke settles into the walls. Rain taps through weak shingles, bed frames creak, babies fuss in the heat. Yet even in such modest spaces, home matters deeply. A landlord who threatens rent hikes, sudden removal, or repair neglect is not only manipulating property, he is pressing on the nervous system of a household. Employers do something similar with wages and reputation. A white employer may not merely supervise work. He may assume a right to comment on your speech, your family decisions, your clothing, your whereabouts, and your emotional tone. If you seem too proud, too independent, too unwilling to flatter, he can mark you as troublesome. In a world built on racial deference, self-respect may be misread as rebellion, or perhaps not misread at all. Sometimes it is correctly read, which is what frightens them. Then there are vigilantes, the self-appointed guardians of racial order, who flourish in places where the line between private terror and public approval grows thin. These men may ride at night, gather in secret, or operate openly enough that everyone knows their names without speaking them too loudly. They do not always need to act. Rumour about what they might do can be enough to shape behaviour. That is the genius of intimidation. It multiplies itself through imagination. A threat whispered at one farmhouse can alter decisions made in 10 others. Night carries this fear differently. You hear hoofbeats on a road where no visitor was expected. A dog barks, then another. The house feels smaller. Lamplight throws nervous shadows across the floorboards. The smell of kerosene grows stronger because someone turned the wick too high with shaking fingers. Children are hushed more quickly than usual. An older relative sits in silence, listening hard. Outside, the darkness seems to have texture. It presses against the walls. No one needs to explain what night riders mean. Their meaning is already in the body. Historians continue to debate the exact relationship between formal law enforcement and extra-legal white violence in some local settings, because documentation can be uneven and public denials were common. What is not seriously disputed is that the two often reinforced one another, even when officers did not directly participate in racial terror. Their indifference, delay, or selective investigation could make the threat more powerful. A community learns very quickly whether protection will arrive, and learns even faster when it will not. Surveillance also affects emotion. It teaches caution so thoroughly that even joy acquires a nervous edge. A laugh must not be too loud in the wrong place. A good suit must not look too fine if it might be read as arrogance. A gathering must be measured. A celebration must end at a sensible hour. The body becomes an instrument tuned for risk assessment. You listen, scan, calculate, and regulate yourself because someone else is always eager to interpret. That constant self-management is exhausting in ways outsiders rarely grasp. Women carry special burdens under this watching world. Their movements are scrutinized for supposed moral failings, domestic competency, and sexual availability, all through racist lenses that deny them ordinary respect. A woman working in someone else's house may be watched by employers, judged by neighbours, and left vulnerable to accusation or abuse with little hope of fair recourse. Yet she must still keep moving, keep earning, keep protecting children, keep the household stitched together. The rustle of a skirt in a hallway, the sting of lye on cracked hands, the smell of starch and hot iron become part of a daily discipline shaped by both labour and threat. Children learn surveillance almost as early as speech. They are taught who may be trusted, which roads to avoid, how to answer questions from white adults, and when to come home without delay. A boy sent to deliver a parcel memorises not just the route, but the moods of the houses along it. A girl carrying books knows which porches produce comments and which might offer a nod of kindness. Childhood under watch demands unusual seriousness. Play survives, thankfully, but it survives alongside alertness. One surprisingly vivid detail from black community life is the importance of curtains, shutters, and yard placement as tools of self-protection. Families learned how a window left open or closed, a porch chair moved at a certain hour, or a lamp placed in a particular room could reveal or conceal just enough information from prying eyes. Domestic space became strategic space. The feel of a curtain hem between your fingers. The scrape of a chair moves softly across the floor. The careful lowering of a shade at dusk. All could be tiny acts of control reclaimed from a larger system trying to deny it. Churches and fraternal lodges often served as semi-protected spaces, but even they could not assume privacy. Meetings might be observed, sermons might be reported, organizing efforts could be infiltrated. Still, these institutions remained vital because they gathered people into networks strong enough to share warnings and resources. A deacon leaving church might carry not only a hymnal but fresh knowledge about a deputy's temper, a land dispute, a fairer employer, or rumours of approaching trouble. Information is one of the first offences against intimidation. This world produces a strange double consciousness of place. A road is a road, but it is also a record of who patrols it. A shop is a shop, but it is also a stage where one misread interaction can become a story told against you. A porch is a porch, but it is also a watchpost. Even the weather can matter. A stormy night may hide movement. A bright moon may make a rider easier to identify, or make your own house feel more exposed. You become a reader of atmospheres because atmospheres may decide outcomes, and yet, for all this watching, white authorities and vigilantes rarely fully understand what they are observing. They see behaviour, but not always meaning. They notice gatherings, but not the coded messages folded inside ordinary conversation. They track employment, but not the private judgments families are making about whether to leave, endure, or resist. They watch the body, but they cannot easily map the mind. That gap matters. It creates room, however small, for strategy. A landlord may think he is simply collecting rent, while the tenants are also measuring his reliability, sharing notes with neighbours, and deciding whether another arrangement might be safer. A sheriff may think a warning has ended a matter, while the family he warned is already changing routines, contacting kin, and preparing alternatives. Vigilantes may think fear has silenced a district, while people inside that district are storing information with remarkable patience. Oppression often mistakes outward restraint for inward surrender. History suggests it should know better by now. Late in the day, the sunlight turns gentler and lays a copper glow across fences, wagon wheels, and laundry lines. You hear insects rise in the grass, somewhere. A woman calls children home, somewhere else. Men talk quietly outside a barber shop, hats tipped back, eyes following the street without seeming to. The scene is calm enough to paint, calm enough to misread. Beneath it runs a current of practiced awareness. That awareness is not paranoia, it is expertise born of necessity. It teaches when to speak and when not to, whom to trust, which official is all bark and which one is truly dangerous, which white employer may be stingy yet predictable, and which smiles too much to be safe, which rumours should be ignored and which should send you home before sunset. Knowledge like this rarely appears in official records, yet whole communities depended on it. So you live in a world of watching eyes and learn to watch back, though in different ways, not always openly, not always dramatically, often through the smallest details. A look exchanged across a yard, a changed route, a shortened visit, a meeting moved, a child instructed, a lamp extinguished a little earlier than usual. These are not the gestures of people without agency. They are the movements of people surviving inside a system that treats observation as control. The pressure remains heavy. Police, landlords, employers, neighbours, and vigilantes all attempt to narrow your possibilities and make caution feel like the only language worth speaking. But life continues under scrutiny with a stubborn intelligence. Meals are cooked, rent is managed somehow, children are guided, warnings are passed, Dignity is protected in fragments large and small, under countless watchful eyes. Black Americans built not just endurance, but a disciplined art of perception. Inside the home, the world sounds different. The street may still grumble outside with wheels, voices, and sudden trouble, but once the door shuts, the noise softens into something more manageable. Wood settles in the walls, a pot lid rattles gently on the stove, someone folds clothes with a dry rustle of cotton. A baby sighs in sleep. Evening light turns thin and honey-coloured as it slips across a floor scrubbed as clean as circumstances allow. The house may be small, crowded, and worn by weather, yet it holds something precious. A little control, not much, perhaps enough to matter. The smell inside is a blend of cornbread, soap, warm cloth, lamp smoke, and the faint dampness that clings to old timber after rain. You feel rough boards beneath your feet. You feel the softness of a quilt patched from many past lives. Home in this world is not simply shelter. It is a workshop for survival. The household teaches lessons the law never will and the street cannot afford to explain kindly. Here, adults pass down practical wisdom in tones so ordinary that a stranger might miss their importance completely. A mother does not always speak dramatically when she teaches caution. She may be shelling peas, the bowl cool against her lap, while children sit nearby listening without seeming to. She says which roads are best avoided after dark, which white families can be dealt with carefully and which should be given wide distance, how to answer a question without inviting another, how to carry yourself so no one mistakes your fear for guilt or your confidence for challenge. Her voice stays even. That is part of the lesson too. A father, uncle, or grandfather may explain contracts by the fire with a seriousness that settles over the room like extra weight. He taps the paper with a thick finger and points to names, dates, amounts. Maybe he can read every line. Maybe he cannot, but he knows where the traps usually hide. He tells the younger ones that the man who smiles too easily may still cheat, that no promise counts until it is fixed in a way others can witness, that a debt can grow teeth if you let someone else name its size. It is an education in realism, delivered beside supper bowls and mended shoes. Children absorb these lessons as naturally as they learn grace at the table, or how to carry water without spilling too much. They are told when to come straight home, which errands require speed, why some parts of town must be crossed with care, why a white child's insult cannot always be answered the way fairness would suggest. This is not because adults wish to raise timid children. It is because love under pressure becomes deeply strategic. Safety is taught in increments, disguised as routine. You can see that strategy in the arrangement of the house itself. Important papers are wrapped in cloth and tucked into trunks, Bible covers, or the back of drawers. A little money may be hidden where only trusted hands know to reach. Good clothing is preserved carefully because appearance can influence how a family is treated in public. A spare sack of meal, a jar of preserves, extra candles, a stitched blanket. All these ordinary items carry unusual importance. Security is built from small reserves. A household with even a little stored away has bought itself a sliver of breathing room. Meals become one of the great engines of endurance. Supper is not simply food, it is timing, order, and reassurance. The crackle of skillet grease, the steam rising from greens, the spoon against a pot, the smell of onion and salt pork, all say that the family has made it through another day. Even when ingredients are plain, the act of sitting together creates steadiness. Children report what happened. Adults trade news. Someone complains softly about sore feet. Someone else laughs despite everything. Laughter at the table is not trivial. It is proof the household has not surrendered its spirit. Women often carry the heaviest weight in shaping this domestic order. They labour outside the home or within it, and then return to cook, mend, wash, discipline, comfort, organise, and remember. Their memory itself becomes infrastructure. They know which child outgrew which shoes, which neighbour can be trusted for a loan of flour, which cousin wrote from another county, which employer underpaid last month, which church sister might help if illness comes. The household runs partly on skill, partly on sacrifice, and largely on women's astonishing ability to hold 10 urgent things in mind at once. That work is emotional as well as physical. A woman might calm a frightened child while quietly masking her own fear. She may braid a daughter's hair with gentle fingers, even while calculating how to stretch food until payday. She may smooth a son's collar before school, reminding him to speak respectfully without letting him believe respect must equal worthlessness. She must protect innocence where possible, and prepare children for danger where necessary. It is an impossible balance, which is perhaps why so many managed it with a kind of greatness too rarely named. Men in the home also face a difficult emotional burden. The wider world often tries to strip black men of authority, autonomy, and the basic ability to protect their families openly. That pressure can be painful in quiet ways, yet many fathers, brothers, and grandfathers created forms of protection that were less theatrical than the world's masculine myths, and more useful. They taught observation. They repaired what could be repaired. They walked children to certain places. They maintained gardens, fences, and roofs. They settled disputes carefully. They held the household together not only by earning, but by staying attentive. In these homes, religion often takes on a practical texture. Prayer is not abstract piety floating above reality. It enters the day through whispered grace, bedside petitions, hymns hummed while scrubbing floors, and Sunday clothes brushed clean despite fraying seams. The Bible may sit in a place of honour, but it is also a document box, a family record, a source of language for grief and hope. Its pages smell faintly of dust and hands. Names are written inside, births remembered, marriages marked, a family history protected in a world that has tried hard to erase such histories. Historians still argue over how much privacy black households could truly maintain in different times and regions, especially where white employers, landlords, or officials intruded heavily into domestic life. But even under severe pressure, homes remained crucial sites of self-definition. The household was where people decided what names they would answer to, what stories their children would hear, how their dead would be remembered, and what standards of conduct would govern them when no hostile eye was supposed to be present. That inner governance mattered enormously. One fascinating detail from black domestic life is the role of coded ordinary speech. Families and neighbours could discuss danger, money, movement, or white behaviour in language that sounded harmless to outsiders. A comment about weather might carry advice. A casual remark about someone being restless could mean a person was thinking of leaving for safer work elsewhere. Even recipes, visiting plans, and church chatter might hold secondary meanings depending on tone and context. The kitchen table could function as a discreet communications desk, which sounds almost too clever for daily life, until you remember that daily life was exactly where such cleverness had to live. The soundscape of home helps steady frayed nerves, the swish of a broom across the floor, the click of knitting needles, a hymn sung low while babies are rocked, crickets beyond the wall, rain on the roof. These sounds form a kind of protective curtain. They cannot stop the outside world, but they can soften its edges long enough for a family to think, plan, and rest. Rest itself becomes a serious achievement. Sleep, when finally reached, is not laziness. It is repair. Bedrooms or sleeping corners tell their own story. A feather mattress, if you're lucky. Straw ticking, more often. Quilts pieced together from worn dresses and work shirts. The fabric feels thin in places and soft in others. Children share space. Adults remain half alert even while lying down. A cough in the night, a horse on the road, wind striking the shutters. Any of these might bring someone upright at once. Yet tenderness lives here too. A child tucked in carefully, a forehead kissed, a prayer whispered over someone already asleep. The home also shapes dignity through appearance. Sunday clothing is brushed and folded, hair is combed with care, shoes are cleaned if possible. This is not vanity, it is insistence, in a society eager to attach shame to blackness and poverty alike. Presentation becomes one way of claiming moral and personal authority. A pressed dress, a polished shoe, a neatly tied neckcloth. These can speak before a word is said. They declare that hardship has not erased standards. They announce self-respect in fabric and posture. Visitors bring another layer of life. Neighbours sit on porches in the evening where the air is cooler. Women exchange patterns, remedies, and stories. Men discuss work, prices, or troubling rumours with measured voices. Children drift between laps, steps, and yards until sleepiness wins. Hospitality survives even in scarcity. Coffee may be thin, cake may be absent, but a chair is offered, a plate shared, news traded. Community begins in such gestures, and communities under strain rely on them more than outsiders often realise. Sometimes the home must become a place of recovery after humiliation elsewhere. A son comes back from town angry because a storekeeper mocked him. A husband returns silent after being shorted on wages. A mother sits down heavily after a day in service, a hand smelling of soap and someone else's polished silver. The family receives these wounds in different ways. A joke may lighten the room, a warning may be given, silence may be respected. Care does not always look soft. Sometimes it looks like making space for pain without letting it define the whole evening. Homes also preserve joy in stubborn forms. Birthday treats made from little, storytelling after supper, hair braiding that turns into laughter. Children playing clapping games by lamplight, someone tapping rhythm on the table, a grandmother's tale delivered with sly humour and a raised eyebrow. Joy inside the home is especially powerful because it exists without permission. No official grants it. No landlord can fully account for it. No sheriff can measure it properly. The physical house may be fragile. Wind may creep through cracks. Rain may drip into pans set beneath the ceiling. Winter may press cold through every board. But fragility should not be mistaken for weakness. Some of the strongest institutions in Black American life have existed in spaces the world considered humble. A single room can hold memory, planning, discipline, love, and the hard school of racial survival all at once. By the time the lamp burns low, the house has done its work for the day. Supper has been shared. Lessons have been passed down. Clothes set out, worries named or carefully hidden. Outside, the world still waits with its demands and dangers. Inside, blankets pull close and breathing slows. The smell of embers and soap lingers in the dark. What the larger society tries to control through law, labour, and intimidation, Black families answer in private through routine, instruction, tenderness, and discipline. The home cannot erase the outside world. It can prepare people to meet it. It can create steadiness where public life creates strain. It can teach children how to survive without teaching them to despise themselves. That is no small achievement. It is one of the quiet masterpieces of endurance. There are evenings when resistance does not look like protest at all. It looks like someone choosing a bright ribbon in a dry goods store. It sounds like laughter spilling out of a barbershop after sundown. It smells like cinnamon, hot grease, and sweet batter rising from a kitchen before a church social. It feels like polished shoes on a dance floor made from scuffed boards. In a world determined to supervise Black life, joy becomes more than pleasure. It becomes a way of refusing the script. You move through a Saturday night where the air is warm and soft, carrying the scent of magnolia, wood smoke, perfume, and dust lifted by passing feet. Somewhere nearby, a piano picks out a lively tune. A fiddle answers. Voices rise, teasing and playful. The sound is not careless. It is earned. People who have spent the week under the eyes of the employers, police, and landlords now claim a few hours to look splendid, talk freely, and feel themselves fully alive. That claim matters. Style is one of the first languages of quiet defiance. Clothing in Black communities is rarely just practical, even when money is short. A carefully tied neckcloth, a hat brushed clean, a dress sewn to flatter the figure, gloves saved for church, shoes shined until they reflect lamplight. All these choices say something important. They say the body belongs to the wearer, not to the old logic of control. Elegance becomes a reply to insult, not an argument shouted in court, but one stitched into hems and collars. A woman standing before a small mirror may smooth her dress with patient hands, adjusting the fit by touch more than sight. The room smells of starch, face powder, and a faint trace of hair oil warmed by the day. She has worked hard for this outfit or made it with care from limited cloth. The result is more than vanity. It is composure made visible. The outside world may treat her as lesser. Her appearance calmly disagrees. Men perform a similar art in different ways. A crisp shirt, suspenders sitting just so. A hat tilted with personality rather than caution. A pocket watch if fortune has been kind. These details help build a public self no one else has the right to define. In some towns, black barbershops become places where style, humour, politics, and community overlap. You hear the snip of scissors, the buzz of conversation, the slap of a palm on a knee during a punchline. Bay rum and talc mingle with tobacco and warm evening air. A barbershop can be a grooming room, an information office, and a theatre all at once. Humour itself is a vital form of resistance. It takes nerve to laugh under pressure, and skill to laugh in ways that do not hand your enemies a victory. Black humour often moves with layers. A joke may entertain on the surface while carrying social critique underneath. A storyteller can mimic pomposity so perfectly that a room nearly folds in half trying not to laugh too loudly. Someone describes a local official with such exact exaggeration that everyone understands the insult without hearing a forbidden word. Wit allows truth to move where blunt speech might be punished. Music does even more. In homes, churches, dance halls, work camps, and street corners, music creates emotional space the controlling system cannot fully penetrate. Spirituals carry sorrow and hope together. Work songs steady the body and synchronize effort. Ragtime, blues, brass band music, and later, jazz-infused pleasure with intelligence, improvisation, and urban cool. You feel a deep rhythm in your chest before you can name it. Feet tap the floor, shoulders loosen, voices answer one another. Under conditions designed to narrow movement, music gives movement back. A piano in a rented room can change the entire mood of a block. So can a trumpet on a porch or a guitar in a yard after supper. Sound travels over fences and through windows, spilling beyond the walls meant to contain black life. That is part of its power. Music crosses boundaries even when bodies are restricted. The notes move where policy cannot follow fast enough. Food carries similar meaning: a church supper, a family celebration, a street vendor's tray, a picnic spread after service. These are not merely chances to eat. They are chances to gather, display care, and extend abundance even when resources are tight. The smell of fried chicken, stewed greens, baked ham if someone has done especially well, sweet cakes, pies cooling on a sill, all of it creates a temporary world richer than the one public life allows. Recipes preserve memory. Hospitality preserves worth. Feeding people well under constraint is a serious achievement. One quirky but revealing detail is the social importance of ice cream at black community events, when it could be afforded. In an age before easy refrigeration, ice cream at a church fair or social was a small wonder, a symbol of effort and festivity. You can imagine the cold sweetness on the tongue after a hot day, children wide-eyed with delight, adults pretending to be more dignified about it than they truly feel. Such moments were not frivolous. They announced that pleasure belonged to black life too. Church socials, lodge events, school programs, holiday parades, Emancipation Day celebrations, and neighborhood entertainments offered chances to turn collective joy into visible presence. A parade down a main street, with banners, polished shoes, brass instruments, and Sunday hats, could challenge the social order simply by occupying public space with dignity and confidence. The sound of drums and horns rolling through town was not always welcomed by white observers, which tells you a great deal. Joy that stays hidden is tolerable to a controlling system. Joy that appears in public with good posture and excellent tailoring can be strangely threatening. Dance deserves its own respect here. In a world where black movement has been regulated, watched, and judged, dancing becomes a reclamation of the body. The room may be plain, the floor rough, the air thick with heat and perfume and lamp smoke. But once the music begins, bodies answer with grace, wit, and personal style. A step can flirt, a turn can boast, a pause can command attention. Dance turns physical presence into art, which is a fine way of denying anyone else the right to define what your body is for. Beauty culture also grows into a powerful world of its own. Hair care, skin care, dressmaking, grooming, and cosmetics become parts of a broader economy of black self-presentation and entrepreneurship. Beauty parlours and home-based stylists offer more than appearance. They offer conversation, business opportunity, and the pleasure of being tended to with respect. The smell of pomade, pressing oil, hot combs, perfume, and face powder fills those spaces. A woman leaves not simply styled, but restored. Looking good under a hostile order is not shallow, it is morale. Historians still differ over how openly white authorities perceived black pleasure as a political threat in various communities, because reactions could range from amused tolerance to active repression. Yet it is clear that independent black gathering, especially when economically successful or publicly visible, often drew suspicion. Why? Because pleasure creates solidarity. Shared enjoyment reminds people that life can be broader than the narrow place assigned to them. That reminder is dangerous to systems built on resignation. Books, newspapers, theatre, and public speaking contribute their own forms of delight and defiance. A reading circle in a private home, a school recital, a dramatic performance in a lodge hall. These events nourish the mind while strengthening community confidence. Imagine rows of chairs set up in a modest room, the smell of lamp oil and pressed clothing in the air. Children fidgeting until the program begins. Then the hush as someone steps forward to recite. Applause erupts, faces brighten, talent is witnessed, ambition becomes audible. Sports and games also matter. Baseball teams, foot races, card games, checkers on a porch, children's street games. All these create spaces where skill and style can be recognised on different terms than the wider society allows. Competition offers dignity when fairness elsewhere is scarce. A boy sliding into a dusty base, a crowd shouting from the sidelines, women shading their eyes from the sun, men pretending not to care too much while caring very much indeed. Such scenes build local pride. Pride is not a small thing when insult is everywhere. There is gentle sarcasm in all this too. Black communities often mastered the art of flourishing in ways that must have deeply annoyed those who expected submission to look joyless. To insist on good food, sharp clothes, excellent music, polished manners, and sly humour while living under racial constraint is a kind of grand social irony. You might call it elegance with a raised eyebrow. This does not mean joy erases pain. Far from it. The same person laughing at a social may have spent the morning being cheated on wages. The woman leading a choir may carry deep grief. The young man showing off his best shoes may be worried sick about rent. Joy in this setting is not innocence. It is effort. Sometimes brave effort. Sometimes exhausted effort. But effort all the same. The body remembers that complexity. You feel it in the relief of dancing after a week of strain, in the sweetness of cake after plain suppers, in the warmth of conversation where you do not have to measure every word, in the pleasure of entering a room where people greet you as someone worth seeing. The senses keep score. A controlling world produces tension. Communal joy releases some of it, and in releasing it, helps people continue. Children especially need such spaces. They need games, songs, treats, applause, and silly jokes. They need to see adults laughing as well as warning. A childhood made only of caution would be too heavy to bear. So families and communities create delight where they can. A ribbon in the hair, a biscuit extra sweet on a holiday, a school exhibition with proud parents in the audience, a picnic with music and running and the smell of cut grass under the sun. These moments tell children that black life is not just a problem to be managed. It is a world worth loving. As the evening deepens, the room grows warmer from bodies in motion. Music rolls on. Skirts swish, shoes scrape and tap. Someone claps on the offbeat with perfect timing. Someone else laughs so hard they have to sit down. A plate passes from hand to hand. Windows stand open to invite a breeze that barely comes. Outside, the night remains full of restrictions and watchful eyes. Inside, another truth is being practiced. You're more than what power permits. That is why joy matters so much here. It is not a distraction from the struggle for dignity. It is one of the ways dignity survives. Style, food, music, beauty, humour, sport, dance. and public celebration all help Black Americans preserve selfhood under systems designed to flatten it. These pleasures nourish communities, sharpen bonds, and keep despair from taking too much room. By the time the last song slows and people gather hats, shawls, and children gone drowsy with excitement, the night air feels cooler against the skin. Perfume and sweat fade into the softer smell of grass and dust. Lamps dim one by one. Goodbyes stretch on porches and walkways. Feet turn toward home carrying leftovers, gossip, and the memory of a room where laughter had the final word. In a society trying to regulate every move, such laughter is not small. It is a quiet triumph. You sit in a room built for learning, though the world around it has done very little to make learning easy. Morning light spills across rough floorboards and catches the floating chalk dust in the air. The room smells of pine, slate, ink, wool coats drying from rain, and the faint smoke from a stove that never seems quite able to heat every corner. Desks wobble. Books are precious. Windows rattle in the wind. Yet the place feels charged, almost electric, because inside these walls people are trying to master something that control systems fear deeply. Knowledge, education after slavery carries an unusual intensity. For generations, Black people had been denied literacy by force, custom, and terror, because reading and writing threatened the whole logic of human ownership. Once that barrier cracked, the hunger for learning surged with extraordinary energy. Children came, of course, but so did adults. Men who had worked fields all day bent over primers at night. Women with aching wrists traced letters by lamplight after finishing laundry and supper. Elderly people learned to sign their names after a lifetime of being denied that right. The desire was not polite, it was urgent. You feel that urgency in the room itself. Students lean forward. Pages turn carefully because paper cannot be wasted. A teacher asks for recitation, and voices answer with concentration sharpened by purpose. Outside, a wagon passes and a mule brays. Inside, syllables are sounded out as if each one were a step towards something larger than grammar. And in a sense, each one is. Schools for Black children and adults were often underfunded, overcrowded, and vulnerable to harassment. Buildings might be church basements, log structures, former cabins, borrowed halls, or hastily built schoolhouses on donated land. Benches could be rough. Readers might be old or incomplete. Teachers sometimes had little training beyond staying one lesson ahead and possessing a determination that borders on heroic. White hostility ranged from mockery to sabotage to direct violence. Still, schools multiplied because communities insisted on them. A roof that leaked was preferable to ignorance forced by law. A broken desk was better than none. A used book was still a book. You can picture parents gathering to discuss how to keep a school open. Their clothes smell of work and weather. A baby fusses in someone's arms. Men remove hats and speak in low, practical tones. Women compare what money, lumber, or labour can be contributed. Maybe a church agrees to lend its space during weekdays. Maybe a local carpenter offers help. Maybe the teacher will board with a family because cash salary is too uncertain. This is not educational policy from a marble office. It is democracy in aprons and work boots. Teachers hold a remarkable position in these communities. They are instructors, yes, but also examples, organisers, letter writers, and guardians of aspiration. A young teacher may walk miles to a rural school, lunch pail in hand, shoes collecting dust, carrying not only books but a whole set of expectations. Students watch how she speaks, dresses, and carries herself. Parents judge whether she can be trusted with more than arithmetic. Often, she can. A teacher may write letters for neighbours, explain legal notices, read newspapers aloud, or help families navigate paperwork that might otherwise be used against them. Literacy spills beyond the classroom, and what a joy literacy can be. The first successful reading of a sentence, the careful writing of a full name, the discovery that marks on paper can carry a distant voice into your hands. You sit with a primer and trace the shapes, feeling the page beneath your fingertips, hearing the scrape of pencil on slate. At first the letters resist, then suddenly they begin to hold still. A word appears. then another. The world shifts. It does not become fair. Sadly, that would be too generous. But it becomes more legible, and that matters. Reading transforms religion, labour, family life, and self-understanding all at once. A parent can read scripture without relying entirely on another person's interpretation. A worker can inspect a contract more critically. A child can imagine professions and places beyond the immediate horizon. A letter can travel between relatives separated by distance. A newspaper can inform a household about elections, migration, scandal, or opportunity. Literacy opens doors no one can physically see, which may explain why so many people tried so hard to keep those doors shut. Black newspapers become especially important in this educational landscape. They circulate news, arguments, warnings, success stories, obituaries, church notices, political analysis, and public debate. A single copy may be read by many people, passed from hand to hand until the paper softens at the folds. The smell of ink and cheap newsprint mingles with the scent of a coffee, lamp oil, and evening air in parlours where someone reads aloud. Community members listen closely. Newspapers do not simply report the world, they help build one. Libraries, where accessible, can be complicated spaces. Some exclude black readers altogether or allow only restricted use. Others provide limited access, often in segregated or unequal conditions. In response, black communities create reading circles, literary societies, church libraries, and personal collections treasured far beyond their size. A shelf with 20 books can feel like a kingdom if those books are chosen with care. Biographies, readers, sermons, almanacs, poetry, legal guides, spelling books, histories, all can serve as tools for a people denied too many tools for too long. A particularly charming detail from this educational world is the importance of spelling bees, recitations, and school exhibitions. These public events drew families and neighbours to hear students perform knowledge aloud. Imagine a warm evening in a decorated room, paper flowers pinned up, benches crowded with proud adults trying to sit still. Children stand one by one, reciting poems, Bible verses, arithmetic facts, or speeches. The applause is wholehearted. Such events were not minor entertainments. They made intellectual achievement visible and communal. To spell correctly in public could be a kind of victory parade. Education also teaches posture of mind. Students learn not only facts, but habits of asking, comparing, remembering, and doubting. Those habits can be quietly radical. Once a person begins to ask why one school has better books than another, why one group writes the laws and another must obey them, why labour is valued differently depending on who performs it, simple lessons can lead to unsettling conclusions. Schoolrooms therefore become places where obedience and inquiry exist in tension. Teachers must navigate that tension with care. Too much direct challenge can draw danger. Too little leaves minds underfed. Historians still debate the balance between industrial education, classical education, and community-defined practical learning in black educational thought during different periods, especially as leaders disagreed over what strategies best served freedom and advancement. Yet beneath those debates, ordinary families often held a straightforward conviction. Education should help people survive, think clearly, and claim fuller personhood, whether through Latin, carpentry, bookkeeping, or literature. The point was not mere Polish, the point was power. For women and girls, education carries special weight. Schooling may offer routes into teaching, clerical work, leadership in clubs and church organisations, and stronger command over family life and public speech. A girl reciting confidently before a room full of adults is not simply charming. She's practising presence. She's learning that her mind has public value. In a society that frequently underestimates black women while depending on their labour, such development matters immensely. For boys and men, schooling can challenge pressures that push them solely into hard labour without intellectual recognition. A young man who reads well, writes letters, keeps accounts, or argues a point with evidence is harder to reduce to brute usefulness. That does not mean the world will stop trying. It means he brings additional tools to the contest. Some men attend night schools after full work days, eyelids heavy, hands rough, clothing smelling of sweat and dust. Their persistence gives the room a kind of solemn dignity. The classroom is not always peaceful. Winter brings cold feet and numb fingers. Summer brings flies, heat, and drifting attention. Supplies run short, teachers leave for better pay, or because harassment becomes too heavy. White officials may interfere. Buildings may be threatened or burned. Children may miss weeks for farm labour, family need, or illness. Learning under pressure is often uneven, but uneven is not the same as futile. A child who attends intermittently may still learn enough to read a Bible verse, sign a form, or decode a newspaper headline. Those are not small gains. Home and school reinforce each other. A parent who cannot read may still insist on homework being done. Posture corrected, attendance maintained. Children recite lessons at kitchen tables while supper smells drift from the stove. Older siblings help younger ones. Someone practices penmanship with fierce concentration while a baby sleeps nearby. Education becomes woven into domestic life rather than isolated from it. In that sense, the whole community becomes a campus, though with fewer endowments and considerably more grit. Churches often support this educational mission in direct and indirect ways. They host schools, raise funds, provide teachers, celebrate academic achievement, and frame learning as both practical and sacred. A Sunday sermon may praise not only salvation, but study. A church anniversary program may feature children reading or singing. The smell of hymnals, pressed clothes, and polished wood mingles with the smell of books stored in side rooms. Spiritual and intellectual striving meet each other there without much embarrassment. There is also pleasure in learning itself. Not every moment is struggle. Sometimes a child delights in geography, tracing rivers and states with wide eyes. Sometimes a woman laughs while mastering a difficult word at last. Sometimes a room erupts because someone has read a sentence flawlessly after weeks of effort. Those moments matter because they remind everyone that education is not only a shield against exploitation, it is also a human delight. To know is pleasant. To understand is satisfying. To read your own world and others beyond it can feel almost luxurious. As afternoon light shifts across the classroom, the sounds change. Slates scrape more slowly. The stove clicks faintly as its heat fades. Outside, someone calls from a yard. The teacher closes a book and gives the final assignment. Students gather things carefully, as if each page were precious because it is. They step back into a world still eager to limit them, but they leave carrying new words, sharper thoughts, and a slightly wider sense of possibility. That widening is exactly why education matters so much in a controlled society. A system can monitor roads, labour, housing, and public behaviour, but knowledge alters how a person interprets every one of those things. It gives names to injustice, it reveals alternatives, it preserves memory, it strengthens communication. It helps people imagine futures not fully dictated by local power. So you keep learning, whether in a formal classroom, at a church bench, around a kitchen table, through a newspaper read aloud, or by lamplight with tired eyes. The desks may be rough, the books may be scarce, and the road to school may be muddy, but the work continues. Under conditions designed to narrow black life, education becomes both refuge and instrument, both shelter and blade, quietly, steadily, behind closed doors and within fragile walls. Minds are being armed. At some point, many people begin to ask the question that hovers over every hard place. Do you stay, or do you go? The question does not arrive in grand fashion. It slips into ordinary evenings while dishes are dried, boots are unlaced, babies are rocked, and tired adults sit with the day's dust still on their clothes. The room smells of lamp oil, supper scraps, and warm fabric. Outside, insects pulse in the dark. Inside, someone mentions a cousin in another city. Someone else says wages are better farther north. A pause follows. Everyone hears what is really being asked. Leaving is never just movement on a map. It is a gamble against uncertainty, expense, loneliness, and fresh kinds of prejudice. Staying is no simple act of loyalty either. It can mean enduring the familiar dangers of the place where your people are buried, your church stands, and your work is known. Both choices require courage. Both can cost more than outsiders imagine. For many Black Americans, migration begins with rumor and letters. A nephew writes from Chicago or Philadelphia. A friend sends word from St. Louis, Detroit, or Cleveland. Someone heard there is railroad work in one place, packing house work in another, domestic service somewhere else, and schools that run longer terms than the ones back home. A single envelope, carefully folded and reread until the paper softens at the crease, can alter the emotional temperature of an entire household. Words from elsewhere carry possibility. They also carry temptation. You sit at a table while someone reads one of these letters aloud. The handwriting slopes unevenly. The paper smells faintly of ink, travel, and the trunk where it has been kept. The writer says rooms are expensive. Yes, but wages come in cash. He says the winters are brutal. He says white folks can still be cruel, though often differently. He says you can walk certain streets without the same old rituals of stepping aside. He says there are churches full of southern voices, women who make greens almost right, men who still miss the warmth back home, children learning quickly, and noise everywhere. Hope in a letter is a dangerous comfort. It can make your own walls feel too small. The South pulls with roots. Land may not be fully yours, but your memory is rooted there. The smell of pine after rain, the shape of the road to church, the taste of peaches in summer, the graves of kin beneath cedar trees. These things matter. Leaving means more than buying a ticket or climbing into a wagon. It means stepping away from familiar soil and the social knowledge built over years. You know which roads to avoid, which employers cannot be trusted, which families might help, which officials are merely vain, and which are truly lethal. In a new city, such knowledge must be rebuilt from scratch, and yet the pressure to move can become intense. Poor wages, debt, crop failures, racial terror, political disenfranchisement, and shrinking chances for fair treatment all push people toward the idea of escape. Migration is often spoken of as if it were purely aspirational, but many departures are better understood as reluctant calculations. If the local world has narrowed too far, motion starts to feel like survival, not a dream exactly, more like oxygen. Railroad stations become emotional crossroads. The platform smells of coal smoke, hot iron, damp wood, and nerves. Trunks are tied with rope. Hat boxes are clutched close. Children fidget from excitement or fear. Someone presses food into a traveller's hands for the journey. Someone else pretends not to cry and fails with dignity. Departure scenes hold an odd mixture of resolve and sorrow. Even the steam seems dramatic, curling around ankles as if the train itself understands it is carrying more than passengers. It is carrying wagered futures. The Great Migration would later gather enormous momentum, but even before its peak years, black mobility had already begun shaping new lives and new communities. People moved seasonally, temporarily, permanently, alone, in family groups, or following kin networks. Some sought cities, some sought small towns with less entrenched white control, some went west, some returned home after finding the new place harsher than expected. The point is not a single path, but a web of movement constantly tested against reality. Historians still debate the relative weight of economic opportunity versus escape from racial terror in motivating particular migration streams, because letters, memoirs, and local conditions reveal different emphases. In practice, these reasons often merged. A person could want better wages and fewer humiliations at once. A mother might seek safer streets for her sons and better schools for her daughters. A young man might be drawn by industrial work but equally driven by exhaustion, with the old etiquette of submission. Human decisions rarely separate neatly into categories. However much scholars adore categories, those who stay are sometimes misunderstood. Outsiders may assume staying means passivity, fear, or lack of imagination. Often it means something more complex. A family may stay because an elderly parent cannot travel, because savings are too thin, because the land, however precarious, still offers food, because local ties provide childcare, labour exchange, and burial support no city can replace. because not every place elsewhere is actually better, because somebody must keep the church open, because you cannot carry your whole world in a suitcase. Staying can also be a form of commitment. Some black Southerners chose to remain and build institutions under terrible conditions, sustaining schools, newspapers, farms, businesses, and political networks. They did not stay because they accepted injustice. They stayed because home was theirs too, and surrendering every inch of it felt unacceptable. There is bravery in departure, but there is also bravery in endurance rooted to place. The people who leave face new geographies of race. Northern and western cities may offer somewhat greater mobility, more diverse labour markets, and less rigid public etiquette in some respects, but they are hardly free of discrimination, housing segregation, job exclusion, school inequality, and police bias meet migrants at the station with unpleasant punctuality. The city smells different. Smoke, trolley grease, sewage, bread from factories, rain on brick, roasted peanuts from a street cart. The buildings crowd close. The sky looks narrower between them. Opportunity is real, but so is overcrowding. So is loneliness. A young woman arriving in a new city may find domestic work quickly, yet discover that urban employers bring their own forms of surveillance. A man may secure factory labour, only to learn that the wage buys less than expected once rent and food are paid. Children may marvel at paved streets, electric lights, and larger schools, while parents privately miss the slower spacing of fields and the familiar sounds of frogs and cicadas at night. Migration often grants and takes in the same motion. One quirky detail that appears in many migration stories is the importance of food carried for the trip. Families sent travellers off with biscuits, fried chicken, cake, sweet potatoes, or jars of preserves if possible. The meal was practical, of course. Trained food cost money, but it was also emotional. A taste of home travelled with the body into uncertainty. Imagine unwrapping a biscuit gone slightly cool, smelling lard and flour and your own kitchen memory, while the train rocks northward through darkness. Sometimes courage tastes like something packed in wax paper. Letters continue to guide movement after arrival. Newcomers describe neighbourhoods, rents, church addresses, employers, and warnings. Come if you can. Wait until spring. Do not trust the first rooming house near the station. Ask for sister so-and-so at this church. Tell cousin to bring blankets. These messages create migratory chains that make the unknown more navigable. Whole communities stretch across distance through paper, rumour, and kinship. A family in Mississippi may begin to feel connected to a street in Chicago long before anyone has seen it. For those who stay, departure changes the social fabric. Church pews hold absences, fields lose workers, families divide across states, farewells become common. The sound of trains takes on new emotional weight. A mother may stand in her yard at dusk and wonder whether the child who left is warm enough, fed enough, lonely too often, or secretly thriving. Pride and worry sit side by side. That pairing may be one of the most universal conditions of black migration. Children experience these choices differently. Some are thrilled by the idea of trains, tall buildings, and city lights. Others resist leaving grandparents, ponds, orchards, and familiar roads. A child rarely controls the decision, yet feels its effects intensely. New accents, crowded tenements, strange schoolrooms, and unfamiliar winters can reshape a young life very quickly. At the same time, children often adapt faster than adults, which can be both comforting and slightly insulting. They pick up city manners, school routines, and street knowledge while their parents are still trying to decipher rent notices and factory clocks. Movement also changes politics and culture. Migrants carry Southern speech patterns, church traditions, recipes, music, and social customs into urban neighbourhoods that then grow into centres of black cultural innovation. Those who remain in the South continue building forms of resilience and institution that sustain life under ongoing pressure. The story is not one of backward place and forward place. It is a story of black Americans continually making worlds under different constraints, with different textures of hardship and possibility. As evening settles in either location, certain feelings overlap. In the South, a porch may creak softly while fireflies blink beyond the yard, and someone listens for hoofbeats on a distant road. In the city, A window may rattle from passing streetcars while voices rise from the alley and a child falls asleep to the hum of many strangers living close. Different sounds, different dangers, different hopes. Yet in both places, people weigh what can be built here against what might be built elsewhere. That weighing rarely ends. Even after moving, people assess whether they chose wisely. Even after staying, they wonder about roads not taken. Such doubts are not weakness. They are evidence that the choices were real and difficult. A family deciding between rooted hardship and uncertain possibility is not choosing between good and bad. It is choosing between different forms of risk. By night, the decision may still be unresolved. A trunk remains unpacked in one house. In another, someone counts savings beneath the lamp and realizes it is not enough yet. A woman folds a letter and slips it back into the Bible. A man stares at the yard a long time before coming in. The smell of dust, starch, tobacco, and supper hangs in the air. Sleep will come, but not quickly. To leave is brave. To stay is brave. To endure either path with dignity takes a steadiness the wider world rarely acknowledges properly. Black Americans did both. They boarded trains toward uncertain futures, and they held ground in places that had given them every reason to flee. Each choice required judgment, sacrifice, and a talent for living without guarantees. So the road forks in many directions, and you feel the weight of each one. Northbound ticket, familiar porch, city smoke, pine woods, factory whistle, church bell, leaving, staying, enduring. None of it is simple. All of it is human. Under a system that tried to limit every move, even the decision of where to plant your life became an act of profound courage. Change rarely arrives looking neat. It does not step politely onto the stage and announce that the old order has been defeated. More often, it creeps in through courthouse petitions, schoolhouse meetings, careful lawsuits, church collections, whispered plans, newspapers folded in coat pockets, and the stubborn refusal of ordinary people to keep performing inferiority forever. That is how patterns begin to crack. Not all at once, not beautifully, but unmistakably. You stand in a crowd outside a church on a bright afternoon, where the smell of pressed cotton, dust, and magnolia drifts through the warm air. Men in dark suits talk in serious low voices. Women in hats and gloves hold themselves with composed intensity. Children weave between adults, sensing importance even if they cannot yet name it. The church bell has already rung, but people linger because the meeting was not merely devotional. It was strategic. Someone has proposed organising for better schools. Someone else has read a legal notice aloud. A committee is forming. Money is being counted. Signatures are being gathered. The machinery of change is never entirely abstract. It often begins with paper and courage in the same room. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Black Americans were building institutions that did more than help people survive. These institutions began pressing more openly against the racial order itself. Churches, mutual aid societies, newspapers, women's clubs, schools, business associations, and civil rights organizations all expanded the capacity for collective action. The point was no longer only to endure, it was also to challenge. Endurance had prepared the ground. Now more visible claims could grow from it. Black newspapers played a particularly powerful role. Their pages did more than report injustice. They argued, exposed, instructed, and connected scattered communities into something more politically aware and emotionally linked. A reader in one town could learn about legal battles elsewhere, victories in education, examples of resistance, lynching campaigns, voting struggles, labour demands, and migration possibilities. The smell of cheap ink on fingertips, the rustle of pages passed from hand to hand, the hush as one person read aloud to others in a parlour or barber shop. All of this helped create a wider black public sphere. Isolation began to weaken when people could see their local injuries as part of a larger structure and their local efforts as part of a larger fight. Women's organising became one of the great engines of this era. Black women formed clubs, raised funds, supported schools, fought for public health, challenged sexual violence, defended families, and insisted that respectability could be wielded as both shield and weapon. They did this while still carrying heavy burdens of wage labour, domestic labour, and caregiving. The club meeting, with its notebooks, hats, fans, and determined voices, might look modest from outside. Inside, strategy was taking shape, minutes were recorded, petitions drafted, speakers invited, poor families supported, troubling officials named. Women understood that the health of a community depended not only on grand male speeches, but on relentless practical work. Men organised too, through fraternal orders, churches, political groups, unions where possible, and civil rights associations, lawyers, editors, teachers, ministers, porters, labourers, and veterans all contributed to the pressure building against racial control. A man in a neat suit stepping into a courtroom with a file under his arm may not look dramatic enough for legend, yet he could be carrying the hopes of dozens of families who pooled their money to bring a case. Litigation became one battlefield. So did journalism. So did education. So did voting whenever voting could still be fought for. The courtroom carries its own atmosphere. Wood polish, paper dust, ink, sweat hidden beneath formal clothing. Shoes creak on the floor. A judge adjusts spectacles. Lawyers speak in phrases so careful they almost seem bloodless. Yet beneath that formal calm, entire futures can tremble. Black plaintiffs and attorneys knew that justice was uneven and often hostile. But they also knew that records matter, precedent matters, public exposure matters. Even a loss could produce testimony, attention, and momentum for another challenge. That patience is easy to underestimate from a distance. It takes stamina to fight in institutions built to slight you. Education remained central to breaking the pattern. Better schools meant more literate citizens, stronger teachers, more black professionals, and more communities able to navigate bureaucracy, law, and politics. The demand for education increasingly turned into a demand for equality within education, and eventually into a broader assault on segregation itself. A school is never only a school in such a setting. It is where a people decide how fully they intend to imagine themselves. There were also public campaigns against racial violence. A to B. Wells stands as one of the clearest examples of fearless exposure, using journalism and investigation to challenge the lies that justified lynching. Her work showed how truth could be organised into a weapon against terror. She wrote with a force that made polite society deeply uncomfortable, which was precisely the point. Facts, gathered and published with determination, could puncture the false innocence surrounding racial brutality. Historians still argue over which strategies proved most effective at different moments, especially when comparing accommodation, self-help, legal challenge, protest, migration, economic independence, and cultural assertion. Yet it is clear that no single tactic carried the whole struggle. Change emerged from a broad field of effort. Some pushed through courts, some built businesses, some organised voters, some taught children, some exposed violence, some withheld a labour, some moved north and changed the political balance there, some stayed south and kept pressure alive where it was most dangerous to do so. The pattern broke because it was attacked from many directions at once. Economic life also mattered. Black business districts, insurance companies, banks, funeral homes, newspapers, beauty enterprises, and professional networks helped create degrees of autonomy that weakened total dependence on hostile white institutions. Money alone could not save anyone from white supremacy, but financial resources could support schools, lawsuits, political meetings, and mutual aid. A black-owned storefront with polished windows and confident service represented more than commerce. It represented a small transfer of authority. Customers entered and were treated as full human beings. That experience itself could nourish resolve. Then came the wars and the industrial demands that shifted national life. Black military service, wartime labour, and urban migration all intensified old contradictions. A country asking black men to fight abroad while denying them full rights at home was staging a moral argument against itself. Black veterans returned with sharpened expectations and less patience for ritual humiliation. Industrial cities filled with southern migrants who brought voting strength, labour power, and cultural energy. Northern segregation remained real, but the concentration of black communities in new political spaces helped generate fresh forms of activism. Public protest grew more visible over time. Marches, boycotts, sit-ins or petitions, legal campaigns, and mass meetings all helped transform private grievance into public demand. The sensory atmosphere of protest deserves attention. The heat of a crowded church meeting, the ache of feet during a march, the smell of wool suits, perfume, a mimeograph ink and nervous sweat, the tremor in a voice before it steadies at the microphone, the murmur before a speech begins. History often flattens these scenes into symbols, but they were lived in bodies that felt fear and chose action anyway. Young people became especially important. Students and teenagers, raised in homes and schools shaped by earlier generations' discipline, often showed remarkable willingness to challenge daily segregation more directly. They sat where they were told not to sit. They rode where they were told not to ride. They walked into libraries, lunch counters, and schools with extraordinary composure. Such composure did not appear from nowhere. It had been cultivated for decades in kitchens, churches, classrooms, and community halls where adults taught self-command under pressure. The visible courage of youth rested on the long invisible work of elders. One revealing detail from civil rights organizing is the practical attention given to clothing and physical bearing. Participants were often coached to dress neatly, speak calmly, and maintain discipline under harassment. This was partly strategic public relations, but it also reflected a long-standing black tradition of using presentation as armor: a pressed shirt, polished shoes, gloves, hats, straight posture, steady eyes. Such details mattered because the opposition relied heavily on images of black disorder. Dignified appearance turned the lie back on itself. The legal and political breakthroughs of the mid-20th century did not erase the past, but they did break key parts of the old system. Court decisions challenged school segregation. Federal legislation eventually attacked discrimination in public accommodations, employment, and voting. National media exposed local brutality to wider audiences. Boycotts and direct action campaigns forced public confrontations that could no longer be neatly hidden as local custom. Doors that had long been shut began, reluctantly and unevenly, to open, and yet, the story remains more complex than a simple triumph. The habits of control did not vanish when certain laws fell. They adapted: housing inequality, school disparity, economic exclusion, over-policing, and racialized suspicion continued in new forms. The pattern broke, yes, but fragments of it remained embedded in institutions and expectations. Change in history often works like that. The wall cracks, pieces fall, dust fills the air. Then you discover how much rebuilding is still required. Still, it would be wrong, and frankly a little lazy, to focus only on what persisted and miss what was won. There is real power in the breaking itself. The right to vote more securely, the ability to challenge exclusion with stronger federal backing, the collapse of some of the most blatant public rituals of racial humiliation, the growth of black elected officials, professionals, artists, scholars, and organizers working within spaces previously barred or severely limited. None of that was inevitable. It was built. You hear that truth in the voices of older people speaking at reunions, church anniversaries, and family tables. Their stories often dwell on ordinary endurance rather than famous headlines. A grandmother remembers how her mother kept the family together with almost nothing. A grandfather recalls teachers who insisted on excellence in a one-room school. An uncle talks about the first time he voted without someone standing over him. A woman remembers the beauty shop as a place where women traded more than beauty tips. These memories reveal that large political change rested on countless intimate acts of persistence. That may be the deepest lesson. Systems of control aim to dominate daily life so completely that people forget how historical change actually works. But change does not only come from leaders whose names enter textbooks. It also comes from the unnamed who preserve dignity long enough, cleverly enough, and collectively enough for new openings to be seized. The parent teaching a child, the porter reading the newspaper aloud, the teacher saving books, the clubwoman raising dues, the preacher hosting meetings, the barber sharing political news, the seamstress dressing protesters, the cook packing food for a journey. the voter waiting in line despite threat, the child studying by dim light because someone decided that literacy would outlive fear. Evening returns, always does. The sky softens over rooftops and trees. A church window glows. A bus rolls past. Somewhere, a train moans through the distance. The air smells of cut grass, smoke, and the day cooling at last. You stand in this fading light and sense both weariness and inheritance. So much was taken. So much was endured. So much was built anyway. And now the room around you grows quieter. The lamps seem softer now, and the sounds of the world begin to drift farther away, as if they're stepping back to give your thoughts more space. You can almost feel the long arc of these lives settling around you, not as noise, but as a steady warmth. The roads were hard. The rules were cruel. The watching eyes were relentless, yet people still cooked supper, buttoned children into clean clothes, opened school books, sang in low harmony, saved coins in jars, polished shoes for Sunday, packed train food with loving hands, and sat upright in rooms that did not expect them to shine. They kept making life, so let the details soften now, the creak of a porch at dusk, the murmur of a prayer, the smell of soap on folded linens, the hush of pages turning by lamplight, the distant whistle of a train moving through the dark, the night air touching your skin after a hot day. All of it belongs to the story of survival, and all of it carries the quiet miracle of people refusing to disappear. You do not need to hold every date or every law in your mind tonight. It is enough to remember the deeper truth. A system tried to control every movement, yet it never fully captured the inner life of the people living beneath it. They found room for dignity, strategy, tenderness, humour, learning, style, worship, and hope. They made homes where fear was meant to rule. They made music where silence was expected. They made futures where others saw only limits. And as the night grows gentler, you can let that truth rest with you. Human beings are more than the systems built around them. Even under pressure, they remain wonderfully capable of care, invention, endurance, and grace. The voices fade. The houses grow still. The roads empty. Somewhere a final lamp is turned low, and somewhere a tired body finally finds rest. The dark is calm now, the story settles, and you can settle with it, slowly, peacefully, into sleep.